Rufus Nation. It's time for another Bojack seasonal rant. This one's going to be for season 5, which I believe may be the fan favorite season of this series. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it's at least up there. Everybody I talk to who likes the series is really into season 5. And I can see why. It brings back a lot of what I liked in what has been my favorite season so far, season 3, in terms of toward the middle, especially having a lot of experimental episode structures. Things like the Mr. Peanut Butter episode that came out of nowhere, or the episode where Bojack is just giving a eulogy and it's like one continuous shot for like 20 minutes. There was another one right in there, the one that's just a story from the therapist and the I don't remember which, the mediator or whatever, who works with Todd and Princess Carolyn. Those were like really, really fun, interesting episodes that held my attention very well. And then the end of this season also was one of the more shocking and like I don't know if this is the right word to use, but like artful moments in the show. I really liked what they did with sort of fusing the real world and the fictional world of the of the character that Bojack is acting as he sort of loses his sense of self within the role, and it all becomes very confusing to him. How the backgrounds of the scenes will suddenly shift and it will reveal him to be in a different situation, or it'll pan back and forth like it did in that most important scene of the season, the strangling scene. How it was alternating back and forth between in a very confusing manner. It was legitimately sort of confusing to watch as an audience member, which I think is what they were going for. It reminds me a lot of the movie Millennium Actress by Satoshi Kon, and that is a very, very beautiful movie. It is a biopic about an actress who's, it's sort of like her telling the story of her life through the context of the roles she played over the years as she grew up. And there's a lot of these really fun scene transitions where suddenly something in the background will move, or the shot will just like pan to the other side of the room, and all of a sudden they'll be on an entirely different set. They'll be in entirely different costumes. They'll just be in another universe. I think it's really cool. It keeps you on your toes. It's really visually engaging and visually interesting, and I think it's pretty powerful imagery as well. So I really enjoyed those cuts in particular, but throughout the entire season, that was a thing. I think the best way to talk about it, like usual, is just to go character by character. So I'm just going to go in no particular order over like the 5 or so main characters, starting with Mr. Peanut Butter. Why not? So Mr. Peanut Butter in this arc is divorced from Diane, which is not something unfamiliar to him. And he very quickly, like literally within like hardly any time at all, he gets a new girlfriend, even though he openly still has feelings for Diane pretty much. He just gets a new girlfriend who's she's so annoying. Like her thing is that she's just obnoxious. That is her thing, is that you should hate her because she's terrible, and her name is Pickles. And now it's just, she's gross. I don't like her. I don't think anyone likes her. I don't think the guy writing the show likes her, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is, Mr. Peanut Butter gets like a really good episode dedicated to him and his marriage history with his various ex-wives, and how there's sort of a through line between all of them, and that he continues to date very young, immature women, and then once they mature and get to know him better, they invariably end up leaving him, and he quickly moves on to the next thing that can recapture that youthful personality that he's attracted to. And it's sort of reflected as him simply never being able to grow up. It's like he has such a naturally charismatic personality that a lot of things come very easy to him, and that includes social interaction and probably romantic companionship, just because people like him. He's endlessly charismatic. So, like, to a comical degree, he's charismatic. So a lot of people are attracted to him, but I feel once they get to know Mr. Peanut Butter better, no amount of charisma can take you far enough to have like a lifelong relationship with somebody, because you need to be more flexible. You need to be understanding and willing to change the way you are based on the context and communicate with your partner and all that. So he can't just be like Mr. Happy-go-lucky charisma, talk to everybody all the time. It's not. It's tiring. It's not always what you would want your partner to be. and it's sort of inconsiderate. So that's where he's at. That's where he's at. Speaking of inconsiderate, he cheats on his new girlfriend in this arc with Diane, which I'll get to with Diane, which is a whole other thing. And I think he still just genuinely loves Diane. But it's just really crappy because it's funny because it's like, I want to say he's committing to nothing, but he's committing to everything, and he's asking this girl to marry him, but obviously they're not really going to get married, and it's setting up for him to have like his final breakthrough in season 6, I think, where he really makes a change for the better and becomes a new dog, brand new year, new dog, you know. But that's pretty much the gist of Mr. Peanut Butter's arc. I'll probably go into more detail in a few days when I release the season 6 rant after I watch season 6, because I feel like it's definitely setting up Mr. Peanut Butter's arc to be fully satisfied in that last season. But the next character, who else is a main character? I mean, Bojack himself. In this season, he's always been an addict, but in this season he goes like hardcore on being severely addicted to mind-altering inhibitors. So he very much spirals horribly. He spirals like horribly. And he ends up kind of like, he wasn't in a totally lucid mind state, but he ends up trying to strangle somebody because he's so unbelievably mad at her for seemingly no real reason. He spends this season trying to convince himself that he is a good person and he does things for other people, but then him being with this girl Gina sort of disillusions himself once again to his own selfishness, and he's like, oh, you know, I've always just been doing it for myself, blah blah blah, you know, he's the worst, and he's just gonna like pop pills and all that because he's just a terrible person. And then Diane calls him out for essentially using being a terrible person as a cop-out for being a terrible person, saying that like that is the way he is, that is a fundamental, immutable characteristic of his identity that will never change. And he just sort of tries to be like, yeah, no, I accept it and I'm aware of it. So, yeah, I suck. Nobody should hang out with me. But do you want to hang out with me? And then, you know, it's like he has all these people around him. Like Princess Carolyn treats him way too well. Todd for a long time treated him way too well. He has all these people around him who are willing to extend the olive branch like way too far and meet him nowhere near halfway and sort of let him live this self-destructive, hyper-inconsiderate lifestyle. And he's losing that. He continues to lose that. Princess Carolyn was less responsive. Oh my gosh, sorry. Was less responsive to him in this arc. Todd and Bojack barely interacted at all whatsoever, except in like the first 2 episodes, I think. And he spends a lot of the arc kind of alone. Hollyhock comes to visit him, but then it ends up being very uneventful, and then she leaves and he purposefully crashes his car so he can get more pain pills. And he's very alone in this arc, as is Diane, who's sort of like somewhat his foil in the context of this season. Diane is, obviously, she's always been alienated from her family. She is now divorced. Bojack is being Bojack, so she doesn't want to be around him. And her coworkers and boss at like the girl cruise place are like very, very cold and not emotionally responsive to her whatsoever. They don't listen to her. She's very alone. She's in a dingy apartment, probably dealing with like feelings of heartbreak and lack of ability to accept herself. She tries to assimilate herself into, or at least become more in touch with her culture, you know, maybe to find a sense of belonging that way. But even that ends up not really working because she simply was raised in a highly culturally assimilated, like America-ified household. So she really doesn't have anywhere to fit in. She has nobody to talk to, nobody that like she can call her own guys, you know, like the boys or anything like that. She's just kind of totally alone, and I'm pretty sure that's what leads her to making the obviously stupid decision of having sex with Mr. Peanut Butter multiple times. I think she is just that desperate for connection. Not to say she doesn't still have feelings for him. I'm sure that's true, but I think that is definitely what was happening more than anything. And it's especially exacerbated, her loneliness that is, by the fact that she is incredibly harsh on not only others but herself. She just generally has very high expectations of the world, which is totally fair. Most of her things that the hills that she dies on, most of the things she critiques are like very valid to critique. It's like she's usually not being like totally illogical or anything like that. But it is definitely odd how almost every major stand Diane's ever taken as a character seems to be to tear something else down. It seems like she's at her most motivated when she's like talking about how shitty something else is, instead of like proposing too many ideas of her own. A lot of the critiques she sort of lobs at other people are very valid and true. It's just a little bit odd how she is so particularly motivated when tearing other people down, and that same sort of insecurity and negative mindset applies to herself. Now, I think she's one of the more reasonable characters in the show for sure, and I don't think that I would never want to just like lump her in with like Bojack in terms of like, oh well, Bojack has this flaw and then Diane has this flaw, because she's not nearly as shitty right now as Bojack, and she probably never will be. Which is something that I just remembered she said in the arc. She's like, "We are not the same, I am not as bad as you," which is, I mean, just blatantly true. They end the season with Bojack going to rehab and them sort of having like a big like friendship moment, and it kind of makes sense because they're both at the lowest of the low, and they both sort of have no standards for themselves. Like they could only be cared about mostly by people other than themselves, and so they sort of end up caring for each other somewhat, even though Bojack, he's always trying to get something. But you just need people to talk to sometimes. Maybe that's just what you're trying to get. You're just trying to find somebody who will talk to you and comfort you, and maybe you could get some validation even from comforting them and being a friend to them. But the main thing is Diane gets him to finally go to rehab, which I don't know how that's going to go. I mean, there's a whole season left, so I assume he doesn't come back just like totally clean, of course, but we'll have to see how that pans out. In terms of, is that all the main characters? No. There's still Todd and Princess Carolyn. Todd and like the weird sex robot definitely take a back seat in this season, which I very much appreciate. I like Todd. I think he's funny. He's just too stupid to take serious. Like, he's too stupid for me to be legitimately emotionally invested in his endeavors, and it's just sort of, he's just not main character material, if you know what I'm saying. Like, he's a great side character, and I'm glad he was sort of a side character in this arc, as well as the sex robot. The sex robot was pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie. So I appreciated that, I guess. But I'm not the Todd fan I once was. But he took a backseat in this arc, and that was pretty good. Other than that, there is Princess Carolyn, who had one of the more pronounced arcs this season. She's been steadily progressing along an arc for the totality of the show thus far, and she has finally got to the point, a very big point, where she has a baby to look after. There's a flashback scene, or an entire episode dedicated to flashing back to Princess Carolyn's past and explaining why she is the way she is, which shows her, of course, just always wanting to be a very independent and successful woman, wanting to leave her, old town behind and become successful outside off of her own merits. She is almost married because she accidentally gets knocked up by some rich dude, and when turns out she miscarries, her mom calls her essentially a failure, saying she failed to deliver the baby to term, and now she'll never make it. She's ruined her only chances. She sort of realizes that in her mom's eyes, she just is the way she is, and there's nothing to change that. And obviously that's a really crappy mindset, especially because her mom is essentially saying the only way that you're going to find well-being is by being reliant on somebody who you wouldn't even want to necessarily start a family with. You just have to meet somebody rich, marry into the wealth, and sort of live a calm, normal, unproblematic life until death rolls around, pretty much. So that was pretty motivating to Princess Carolyn. She basically vows to only live for herself for the most part. But now we're at a point in the story where she realizes that only living for herself sort of limits her actual ability to meet all of her emotional needs in terms of companionship. She has like she wants to be a mother, she wants to make a positive difference on people around her on an emotional level, and she wants to feel love and all that kind of stuff. So it's like being good to herself is allowing herself to be good to other people at this point, because she's already done everything there is to do on her own and in terms of her career. And she is like a careeraholic. I don't know why I said a careeraholic. She is like a workaholic. But I do think, despite it seeming like she wouldn't be, I think her really good like problem solving abilities and her just ability to focus and really dedicate herself to a cause would probably make her a very good mother. Obviously, there's no perfect. There's no parents are never perfect. It's like impossible. But I do think that she would be a very good mother. So I definitely don't mind this development. And oh man, I think that's mostly it for this season so far. I am excited to watch the next one and hopefully do like a more holistic recap at the end. But that's all for now, guys. Thank you.